Before modern kitchens and viral recipes, there were dishes that quietly ruled American tables, printed in millions of cookbooks, served at family gatherings, and trusted without question. Then, almost overnight, they vanished. Tonight, we're opening the pages of forgotten history through recipes once made famous by Betty Crocker, meals that feel familiar yet strangely distant. Some are comforting, others unusual, and a few might surprise you. But each one carries a story that refuses to fade completely. Stay with me because by the end, you may realize these lost flavors were never truly gone, just waiting to be remembered again quietly. There was a time when a single dish could define an entire generation's idea of comfort, and few recipes captured that feeling quite like chicken divan. First appearing in mid-century American kitchens and popularized through the trusted pages of Betty Crocker, this creamy casserole wasn't just food, it was a symbol of a changing America. In the 1950s and 60s, families were searching for meals that felt elegant but were still easy to prepare. Chicken divan answered that call perfectly. Tender pieces of chicken were layered over bright green broccoli, then covered in a rich, velvety sauce made from cream, cheese, and often a can of condensed soup. It was baked until bubbling, with a golden crust forming on top, something that felt almost luxurious at the dinner table. But what made this dish truly special wasn't just its flavor. It was the way it brought families together. It showed up at Sunday dinners, potlucks, and quiet evenings when something warm and filling was needed. It represented a time when convenience foods were becoming a modern miracle, and recipes like this felt like a glimpse into the future. Yet today, chicken divan has nearly disappeared from everyday cooking. Tastes shifted, fresh ingredients replaced canned shortcuts, and the once beloved casserole slowly faded into memory. Still, there's something haunting about it, the idea that a dish once so common could simply vanish. Because if something this popular can be forgotten, how many others have already slipped away without anyone noticing? At first glance, it looked more like a dessert than something meant to sit beside a roast dinner. Bright, shimmering, and delicately molded, perfection salad once held a proud place on American tables. Introduced through early 20th century cookbooks and later embraced by Betty Crocker, this unusual creation blurred the line between sweet and savory in a way that feels almost unfamiliar today. Made with flavored gelatin, shredded cabbage, carrots, and sometimes green peppers, it was chilled until firm, then sliced into neat portions. The texture alone was enough to make it memorable, cool, slightly sweet, yet filled with crisp vegetables that added an unexpected bite. To families at the time, this wasn't strange. It was modern, even exciting. Gelatin dishes symbolized progress, a new way of preparing food that felt scientific and elegant all at once. Perfection salad often appeared at formal dinners and holiday spreads, carefully shaped in decorative molds that made it look like a centerpiece rather than a side dish. It reflected an era when presentation mattered just as much as taste, when homemakers took pride in creating something visually striking from simple ingredients. But as decades passed, the appeal began to fade. The combination of sweet gelatin and vegetables started to feel out of place in changing food culture. What was once considered innovative slowly became confusing, even unappetizing to newer generations. Now, perfection salad lingers in the shadows of old recipe cards and fading memories. And it leaves behind a quiet question: were these dishes truly strange, or have we simply forgotten how to understand them? There was something almost magical about a dessert that could form itself in the oven without layers, without careful assembly, and without explanation. They called it impossible pie, a name that sounded like a trick, yet for decades, it became a quiet staple in American homes. Shared widely through the pages of Betty Crocker, this recipe felt less like baking and more like witnessing something unfold. The process was deceptively simple. Everything, milk, eggs, sugar, flour, and butter, was mixed together in one bowl and poured into a pan. No crust was prepared, no filling carefully layered. But once baked, something unusual happened. The mixture separated on its own, forming a soft base, a custard-like center, and a lightly golden top. It created the illusion of a perfectly structured pie, as if it had assembled itself while no one was watching. For families in the 1960s and 70s, this wasn't just convenient, it was fascinating. It reflected a time when food was becoming experimental, when new techniques and shortcuts felt exciting rather than suspicious. Impossible pie became a quiet favorite at gatherings, often served without much explanation, leaving guests to wonder how it came together so perfectly. But over time, its charm began to fade. As baking traditions shifted back toward scratch-made recipes, the mystery that once made this pie special started to feel artificial. Still, there's something unsettling about it, the way it transforms on its own, silently. Because sometimes, the simplest recipes are the ones that feel the most impossible to forget, yet somehow we did. There was a time when no gathering felt complete without a bubbling dish pulled straight from the oven, its creamy surface lightly browned and its aroma filling the entire house. Among those dishes, tuna noodle casserole stood quietly at the center of countless American dinners. Popularized through the reliable pages of Betty Crocker, it became more than just a meal. It became a symbol of survival, comfort, and practicality. Born during an era when budgets were tight and convenience mattered, this dish brought together simple pantry staples. Canned tuna, egg noodles, and condensed cream soup were mixed into a thick, hearty base, often topped with breadcrumbs or crushed crackers for a satisfying crunch. It was inexpensive, filling, and easy to prepare, which made it a favorite in households trying to stretch every dollar without sacrificing warmth at the dinner table. But beyond its ingredients, tuna noodle casserole carried something deeper. It represented resilience during uncertain times, especially in the years following war when families were rebuilding their routines. It showed up on weeknights when time was short and at potlucks where familiarity brought comfort. It wasn't meant to impress, it was meant to sustain. As decades passed, however, its reputation began to shift. What was once considered resourceful started to feel outdated. The reliance on canned ingredients no longer matched changing tastes, and slowly, the dish faded from modern kitchens. Now, it lingers in memory as something both humble and forgotten. And perhaps that's what makes it unsettling, the idea that a meal built to endure hardship could quietly disappear once the hardship was gone. It arrived at the table looking almost too perfect, glossy, sweet, and carefully arranged in a way that felt both inviting and strangely unusual. Ham and banana hollandaise was not a mistake or a novelty, it was a real dish, shared confidently through the pages of Betty Crocker, and once served in homes that trusted it without hesitation. The recipe itself feels like something out of place today. Ripe bananas were wrapped in slices of ham, then warmed gently until the flavors softened together. Over the top, a rich hollandaise sauce was poured, thick, buttery, and slightly tangy. The result was a combination of sweet fruit, savory meat, and creamy sauce that blended into something difficult to define. In the 1950s and 60s, this wasn't considered strange. It reflected a time when American cooking was experimenting boldly, mixing flavors that challenged tradition. Convenience and creativity often went hand in hand, and dishes like this were seen as sophisticated, even adventurous. Serving something unexpected at the dinner table was a way to show innovation, a quiet signal that the modern kitchen had no limits. But as years passed, the line between creative and confusing began to shift. What once felt daring slowly started to feel unnatural. The balance of flavors that earlier generations embraced became harder for newer ones to understand. Today, ham and banana hollandaise exists mostly as a memory, one that leaves behind a lingering question. Was it truly a strange idea, or simply a reflection of a time when people were willing to taste something unfamiliar without hesitation? There was a time when dessert didn't need layers of frosting or elaborate decoration to feel special. Sometimes, all it took was a single skillet, a handful of ingredients, and a quiet transformation in the oven. Pineapple upside-down cake became one of those unforgettable creations, widely shared through the trusted recipes of Betty Crocker, and for a while, it seemed to appear on every table that mattered. At first, it was the presentation that captured attention. Rings of pineapple were arranged carefully at the bottom of a pan, often with bright cherries placed in their centers. Brown sugar and butter melted beneath them, creating a sticky, caramel-like layer. Then the batter was poured on top, simple and unassuming. But once baked and flipped, the cake revealed something striking, a glossy, golden surface that looked almost too perfect to cut into. During the mid-20th century, this dessert symbolized both comfort and a touch of elegance. It was easy enough for everyday baking, yet beautiful enough to serve at gatherings. Families remembered the moment it was turned upside down, that brief pause before the pan was lifted, as if something could go wrong or come out perfectly. But over time, its presence began to fade. New desserts replaced it, more elaborate, more modern, leaving this once beloved cake behind. Still, there's something lingering about it, the way it hides its true form until the very end. Because sometimes the most memorable things aren't the ones we see first, but the ones revealed only after we turn everything upside down. In an era when convenience was king, few dishes captured the spirit of practical creativity like the classic jello salad. Once a staple in American homes and popularized through Betty Crocker, it wasn't just a side dish, it was a statement. Families served it at potlucks, holiday dinners, and casual weeknight meals, proud of the shimmering, colorful creation that could be made almost entirely from pantry staples. The appeal was immediate. Flavored gelatin provided a bright, eye-catching base, while additions like canned fruit, marshmallows, or even cottage cheese created contrasting textures that surprised the palate. The salad was molded or layered, and sometimes topped with whipped cream, giving it a playful, almost festive appearance. Children were drawn to its sweetness, adults appreciated its simplicity, and hosts loved that it could be prepared ahead of time, saving hours in the kitchen. But more than convenience, Jello salad symbolized optimism and modernity. In post-war America, households were embracing new products, new flavors, and the promise that life could be made easier without losing sophistication. To make this dish was to embrace progress, to experiment with textures and tastes in ways that were both exciting and approachable. Yet, as decades passed, this once celebrated dish quietly disappeared from most tables. New desserts and sides took its place, leaving behind only memories and yellowed recipe cards tucked into old cookbooks. And that's what makes it haunting. Something so ubiquitous, once adored, can vanish almost entirely, leaving behind only faint traces of color, sweetness, and nostalgia. The Jello salad reminds us that even the most familiar comfort foods aren't immune to being forgotten. In the quiet corners of mid-century kitchens, there was a dish that bridged the gap between simplicity and indulgence: perfection pudding. Though few remember it today, it was once celebrated widely through the pages of Betty Crocker, appearing in lunchboxes, family dinners, and holiday spreads alike. Its charm lay in its delicate balance: rich, creamy, yet effortlessly light, a dessert that seemed luxurious without requiring hours of preparation. Perfection pudding was typically made with a combination of milk, sugar, eggs, and flavorings like chocolate or vanilla, gently cooked until it thickened into a smooth, silky consistency. Some versions were chilled and topped with a dollop of whipped cream, while others were baked just enough to form a subtle, golden crust on top. The result was a dessert that felt both comforting and sophisticated, a rare duality in a time when convenience often meant compromise. Families embraced it not only for its flavor but for what it represented: care, attention, and a touch of elegance, even in ordinary meals. Mothers and grandmothers took pride in serving it, often passing down subtle variations of the recipe that made each family's version unique. It was a quiet tradition, one built on patience and familiarity, and it made an impression that lingered long after the last spoonful disappeared. Yet as modern desserts grew more elaborate and indulgent, perfection pudding slowly vanished from common tables. Its subtlety, once admired, became overshadowed by flashier alternatives. Now, it exists mostly in memory, in old recipe cards and faded cookbooks. A reminder that some of the most delicate pleasures in life can be easily overlooked, waiting for someone to rediscover their quiet perfection. In the post-war era, when families were seeking both convenience and creativity, one dish quietly claimed a spot at many American dinner tables: 7-layer salad. Promoted through the trusted pages of Betty Crocker, this colorful, layered concoction wasn't just a side. It was a statement of modern homemaking, a visual and culinary centerpiece that invited curiosity before the first bite. The salad was as much about presentation as taste. Each ingredient was carefully arranged in clear glass bowls, so every layer could be admired: crisp lettuce, vibrant tomatoes, crunchy vegetables, creamy mayonnaise, shredded cheese, savory bacon bits, and occasionally, hard-boiled eggs. The contrast of textures and colors made it feel almost artistic, a reflection of a time when attention to detail in the kitchen symbolized care and pride. Families loved it because it combined the familiar and the adventurous. It was approachable enough for everyday meals yet striking enough for gatherings. Children marveled at the rainbow-like layers, while adults appreciated the effort it took to assemble something so visually appealing. The 7-layer salad became a quiet ritual, a dish that marked special occasions and everyday dinners alike, bridging the gap between utility and elegance. Over the decades, however, taste changed. Fresh, minimally prepared ingredients became more popular, and layered, mayonnaise-heavy salads slowly fell out of favor. Once ubiquitous, 7-layer salad became a relic of a bygone era, remembered mostly in old cookbooks or family anecdotes. And yet, its disappearance carries a subtle melancholy. A dish that once symbolized both creativity and care is now largely forgotten, leaving behind only the memory of its vibrant layers and the gentle hum of kitchens where families gathered, unaware that one day, something so ordinary could become extraordinary simply because it was lost to time. Among the most curious creations of mid-century America was the dish known as perfection loaf, a savory and slightly sweet meatloaf that found its way into countless kitchens thanks to Betty Crocker. Unlike the standard meatloaf of eggs, breadcrumbs, and ground beef, this recipe often incorporated unexpected ingredients, apples, onions, or even sweet sauces, that gave it a flavor both comforting and surprising. In its heyday, perfection loaf represented more than a meal. It embodied the post-war optimism of American homemakers, a time when efficiency and creativity were equally valued. The recipe was simple enough for weekday dinners, yet intriguing enough to serve at a gathering, where friends and family would comment on its unusual flavor combinations. Its success relied on the balance between savory and sweet, a reflection of culinary experimentation that defined the era. Families cherished it not only for taste but for the ritual of preparation. Mixing, molding, and baking became a quiet act of care, turning ordinary ingredients into something memorable. It was a dish that carried pride, nostalgia, and a touch of curiosity, an example of how everyday meals once held stories waiting to be told. But as decades passed, the perfection loaf slowly disappeared from homes and cookbooks. Modern tastes favored more familiar flavors, and the adventurous combinations that once delighted diners fell out of favor. Now, the recipe lingers only in fading memory and yellowed pages. Its story is a reminder that even dishes celebrated in their time can vanish, leaving us to wonder how many culinary treasures have been quietly forgotten, waiting for someone curious enough to rediscover them and bring them back to life. And just like that, we've traveled through a forgotten world of flavors, from creamy chicken divan to the shimmering layers of 7-layer salad, each recipe carrying whispers of kitchens long gone. These dishes remind us that food isn't just sustenance, it's memory, culture, and a glimpse into the lives of those who came before us. While many of these recipes have faded from modern tables, their stories linger, waiting to be rediscovered. So the next time you stumble across an old cookbook or a yellowed recipe card, remember, history can be tasted, and sometimes, the past is just a bite away.